What's up, everyone, and welcome to the IDP Cover Zero podcast presented by Going for Two. I'm your host, Jerry, alongside Jordan and Hasan. What's going on, guys? Welcome back, Hasan. We missed you last week.
Nice to see you guys. Just saw the Titans win the fourth straight game where we barely had any offense, but our defense just came through clutch in the end like it has been the last 4 weeks.
Yeah, this week is going to be a little interesting too because there's talk of Malik Willis possibly starting. So that'll be fun if he does. The Texans not that great of a defense. So that's definitely going to be a game that I'm going to try to tune into to see how he looks as a starter. We've seen a little bit of him, but mostly in like cleanup duty or because they've been getting blown out. But it's nice to see what he can do if he has to start the game. So we'll see what happens. There's still Tannehill still could start too, but we'll see what happens. We got a couple teams on bye this week, Chiefs and the Chargers. So no Mahomes, no Herbert, no Eckler. No Keenan Allen, Juju Smith-Schuster, all those guys. Couple trades that happened in the NFL this past week. First, we got James Robinson traded from the Jaguars to the Jets for a 6th-round pick, conditional, so it could become a 5th-round pick. Kadarius Toney, speaking of those Chiefs, he was traded from the Giants to the Chiefs for a conditional 3rd and a 6th-round pick. And then one that kind of falls in line with our podcast, you got the Eagles acquiring Robert Quinn, edge rusher from the Bears, for a 4th-round pick. And it's already been stated that he will not be returning next year. So they get about 8, 9, 10 games with them going into the playoffs, see what they could do there. They are NFC favorites right now. So we'll see how much of an impact Robert Quinn has. Hasan, any thoughts on the Robert Quinn move there?
I was wondering, what if they win the Super Bowl? Does he resign, or is he one of those, hey, I won a ring, let me try to do it somewhere else? And then he will be playing the Sunday here on do so that in a couple hours. So we will a little bit.
Jordan, what do you got on the Robert Quinn side?
Yeah, I mean, it feels like it could be maybe a Von Miller type of deal when he went to the Rams last year. The Eagles trying to make the push towards the Super Bowl. I think it helps him out quite a bit. He was kind of the only man along that defensive line for the Bears. So with Fletcher Cox, Brandon Graham, other guys rotating in, Jordan Davis in the mix, not as much pressure on him. He's only had 1 sack in 7 games after coming off 18.5 last year. So that front looks better and better. I mean, the 2 corners for them have been dominant this year. So if they can, the offensive line has been strong, the run game, if Hurts continues to play well, it's a dangerous team there.
Yeah, they're going to be fun to watch. I mean, I'd like to see them in the regular season. Unfortunately, Bills don't go up against them in the regular season. That would be a nice little test there. But if we're going to see them, it's going to be in the Super Bowl. So that'll be a good game too if that happens. Injuries this week. The list seems a little less than what we have had over the past couple of weeks, but it's still some big names out there. Baron Browning, AJ Terrell, Charles Harris, Mike Hughes, Deshaun Elliott, Marshawn Lattimore, Christian Barmore, Levi Wallace, Rashad Weaver, Cole Holcomb, Kwity Paye, Dre Greenlaw, and Eric Armstead are all out. Questionable, and a couple of these guys are tagged with illness, so just keep an eye on that. But you got Frankie Louvu, J.C. Horn, Micah Parsons, Malik Hooker, Emmanuel Agba, Xavier Howard, Byron Murphy, Divine Diablo, Jonathan Abram, Paulson Adebo, Jonathan Jones, Kyle Duggar, Adrian Phillips, Jeffrey Simmons, Kenny Moore, Leonard Williams, and Rashawn Gary. So all those guys are questionable. For the most part, these are all guys that are in your lineup if they're healthy. All of these guys. And I mean, there's some deeper bottom of the barrel guys too that I didn't list off. So make sure if you're in any of those deep IDP leagues that you keep an eye on who's in, who's out. Obviously going into Sunday morning, we've had our Thursday game, Ravens and Bucks, so we already know who played there and what numbers you got from them. But yeah, there's some big names on there. I don't believe I missed any. So with that being said, let's get into the Thursday night recap where the Ravens destroyed the Bucks. Well, not destroyed. They beat the Bucks 27-22. Um, Brady, I mean, he's looking a little rough. I mean, he still threw for like 325 yards. Finally got a touchdown after he was blanked last week, but he's falling apart out there because you could look at the stats. Look that he got 325 yards, but if you actually watch the game, he missed a lot. He missed a lot of receivers back of the end zone, coming across the middle, just overthrowing, underthrowing, one hopping balls. It was just not. It was not pretty. But we're here for the defensive side of things. Hasan, why don't you break down the Thursday night game for us?
Yep. All right. Real quick on Brady, yeah, and the catches that the receiver, like Mike Evans was making like crazy catches in between like three guys. So it's definitely Evans doing the work versus Brady. So yeah, Tampa came out, they looked pretty good. Their first about a quarter and a half, held Baltimore to just 3 points in their first two trips inside the 10. Failed fourth and goal and just very chip shot field goal by Justin Tucker. We had Shaq Barrett, which is big, huge loss for Tampa, who has been relying on their defense all year, believed to have a torn Achilles. Defensive back Geno Stone, who Jordan mentioned last week as taking over for Marcus Williams. He had 6 solo tackles with a pass defense. We had Demarion Williams. He had 1 solo tackle and 4 assisted. We had linebackers A.J. Klein, Patrick Queen, and then defensive back Brandon Stevens. All have 4 tackles apiece. Each quarterback was sacked 3 times. Justin Houston, the 12-year Wiley vet, he's had 2 of them. He's been all over the place all season. 2 solo tackles as well. Marcus Peters, defensive back of the Ravens, he had 3 tackles. Defensive lineman Justin Matabuke had 3 tackles in the sack. Neither quarterback turned the ball over interception-wise. There was a very early turnover on a muff punt by Jalen Darden of the Bucks. Mike Edwards had 11 tackles, 8 solo, 3 of them for Tampa. Linebacker Devin White, who's been, anywhere from linebacker 1 to linebacker like 6 all season long. He had 10 tackles, 6 of them are solo, 4 assisted. Shaq Barrett, before leaving, did have a good game, 4 tackles and a sack, but the season's come to an end. He's going to finish with 31 tackles, 3 sacks, 1 forced fumble. We had Vita Vea and Joe Tyron Chinoco, both able to get to Lamar Jackson behind the line of scrimmage. Vita Vea added 4 tackles, while JTB had 3. Defensive back Keanu Neal, he had 8 tackles himself. Levante David, model of consistency, along with defensive lineman William Golston, each had 6 tackles. Carl Nassib, only 1 tackle, but will most likely be taking over for Shaq Barrett in the lineup, so his production could increase a lot because it will be on the field a lot more. And, a lot of the regular startable IDPs, they started off with a very good week. And, so for the IDP guys, definitely a good start.
Yeah, for the most part, if you started anybody in this game, the guys that you started, you got some good numbers from them. Nobody really disappointed. Even Shaq Barrett, as Hasan mentioned, before he left the game, he had 4 tackles and a sack. So at least he got you some good numbers too in his last game of the season. Some, not necessarily any surprises, but like you're starting Devin White every week. You're starting Mike Edwards in your defensive back spot every week. As far as defensive lineman, Vita Vea could be a spot start. So they're all giving you good numbers. Levante David. And then, as Hasan mentioned, Carl Nassib, he could be a guy that you're looking for on the waiver wire, because he could be taking over that Shaq Barrett spot. And speaking of waiver wire, Jordan, unless you have any thoughts on the Thursday night game, why don't you jump into the waiver wire?
Frenzy. Don't forget the
Oh,
frenzy.
frenzy, waiver wire
Okay.
frenzy.
Thank you. I'm surprised you didn't want to shout out your boy JTS there with the sack since you coined that nickname for
I
him.
was a week. I was a week late on his numbers.
You were, yeah. Yeah, so the waiver wire this week, starting off on the defensive line, I have Grover Stewart, who is a real person that I mentioned last week on the episode, but he's been having quite the breakout season for the Colts along that defensive line. Had 12 total tackles for him last week, but he's actually been pretty consistent all season long. He gets overshadowed by a guy like DeForest Buckner, and rightfully so, but he has 2 sacks and 8 tackles for loss on the year. He is a top 5 in run stuff, so that's tackles either at the line or behind the line of scrimmage. So he's been consistently getting in that backfield, and if you're in a league where you specifically play a defensive tackle, he only offers more value. Moving over to a few linebackers. The first one is a little more of a dynasty stash. He played his first game last week, and that's Christian Harris of the Texans. They just released Kruger Hill this week, so Lovie Smith saying Christian Harris is going to get the opportunity to play a lot more. I wouldn't be surprised if this was the kind of guy that, as he got more acclimated to that defense, gets a little healthier. I wouldn't be surprised if he was leading the Texans in tackles over the second half of the season. So I like him as a dynasty stash. If you're in a deep enough league, he's probably on your taxi squad. But even in more shallow IDP leagues, if he ends up being the main man in the middle of that defense, he potentially could have a big role moving forward. And I know I was one of the people that really liked him coming out of Alabama, and those Alabama linebackers tend to have a pretty good track record. Next linebacker, Leighton Vander Esch. I think he's a guy that's going to be very startable as we move through bye weeks. Hasn't really looked overly healthy since his rookie season, but over the last few weeks, he's looked like he's been back. He had 10 tackles last week, getting in the backfield a little more. So I like a few of his matchups coming up, and I think he has a lot of value as we move through the next few weeks. Another guy, and Jerry mentioned Cole Holcomb being out this week. That's Jamin Davis of the Washington Commanders. Another young athletic linebacker that a lot of people liked. I'm interested to see how much he steps up with that injury. I think he has an opportunity to lead that team in tackles. Cole Holcomb's been all over the field, and that's a big void for them to fill. So I think he has a lot of value, and he's definitely available in a good chunk of leagues. Then rounding it out with a few defensive backs. The first one is Ryan Neal, who I mentioned a few weeks back. Well, I initially mentioned Josh Jones replacing Jamal Adams, but then Ryan Neal replaced Josh Jones, who replaced Jamal Adams. But finally, I think the Seahawks found a safety that has the ability to replace some of the production from Jamal Adams. Ryan Neal has had 7 tackles each week over the last 3 weeks. He's had a sack, a tackle for loss, a forced fumble, an interception, 6 pass defenses over that 3-week span. So he's really been stuffing the stat sheet, and he's probably a must-own at this point, and probably not on a lot of people's radar. So I'd pick him up. I think he's probably a top 15 defensive back for the rest of the season. And then last, probably another stash guy. He's actually out this week, and that's Jalen Hawkins of the Atlanta Falcons. He's had 11 tackles in 2 of the last 3 games. Been starting to really move around that Falcons formation quite a bit. Had an interception in that time span and 2 pass defenses over the last 3 games as well. So anytime you see a guy that has the ability to get in the backfield, they're using him in the box. He also plays coverage with the interception potential, and he's got double-digit tackles. That offers a lot of upside, and I liked the way they were starting to use him. So watch for Jalen Hawkins to be a top 24 DB for the rest of the way out.
All right. And one last thing I wanted to mention about the waiver wire is, and we mentioned a little bit of it last week with buys starting, is you definitely look in the guys that might be dropped because of bye weeks. This week it's a small bye week. You got just the Chargers and the Chiefs out there, and I don't expect guys like Derwin James to be dropped, but look for your Khalil Macks. Look for just guys that out of those teams that you think could help out your team in the long run. Because after this week, barring injury, you got them for the rest of the year. Next week is a bigger bye week. We got 6 teams on bye next week. Browns, Cowboys, Broncos, Giants, Steelers, 49ers. So a lot of those teams that have big name defensive players on them that people are going to be looking to replace and put them in their lineup. And now you're not going to get like a Nick Bosa dropped or a Micah Parsons dropped, but you're going to get some other guys dropped so they can fill their lineup with a legal roster. So look ahead. Make sure you keep in mind that you want to get just so you get stash for the rest of the year, and you got some big names out there that might be dropped that you can possibly add to your roster, and obviously take advantage of your IR spot too. Move those outs to IR. If your league allows doubtfuls or suspendeds, move those to IR, and that way you open up some roster spots and just stash those other players. And that's like the skill part of fantasy, and we'll mention it throughout the entire year. Is like, yeah, fantasy's luck. You never know what a player is going to do. You can't predict this. You can't predict that. All you could do is go off like a model or rankings and stuff like that. But the skill part of it is like managing your roster in the smart way that you can. I do it every week. I try to organize, like, even if I'm going into a week with the exact same lineup that I went into last week, I'm still going to maneuver my players and move my lower guys or move my later guys to my flex, my earlier guys up to the regular spots. And then that way I have that movement that I can go in and just play around with the roster, move my outs to my IR, open up the spots, and not necessarily pick somebody up that week, but at least then the next week comes along and I can make some waiver claims without dropping anybody because my outs are on IR, and I open up some roster spots that way. So let's take a look, see if you could pick up any Chiefs or Chargers or any of the guys next week that people are looking ahead and dropping, and yeah, hopefully you win your league that way. Before we get into our weekly twos, we're going to talk about No House Advantage. Jordan, have you had any luck with No House Advantage since last week?
Yeah, I think I'm done it for 3 straight weeks now, I believe, and put $50 in and been up exactly $5 every week. So the model of consistency right now.
$15, it sounds like. That's enough for a tank of gas. Or a gallon of gas.
Yeah, tank, holy
Definitely
cow.
not a tank. Yeah, this isn't the 1930s. So No House Advantage, if you don't know what it is, it's changing the dynamic fantasy sports platform. You can play in a pick'em style contest versus other people at shots at winning $150,000. They got different contests on there: $5 contest, $10 contest, $20 contest, where you go in, you pick 7 to 10 props, and you order them how you think they're going to go. And as they hit, if you get them correct, then you get points. The most points wins. That's how it works. Download the app, use the promo code GF2, and get a deposit match up to $25, up to your first $25. And you can also play versus the house, which you might have seen on different platforms where you pick 5 different props, and you can you get up to 20 times your money if you hit those props correctly. So you think Leonard Fournette is going over 45 yards, if that's what they have on there, pick the over. You think Tom Brady's throwing for under 300 yards, pick the under. If you get all 5 of them right, you quintuple your money. That's the right word. Quintuple your money, 20 times your money. And you can play different sports: NFL, NBA, MLB, golf, MMA, hockey. Again, use the promo code GF2. Use it at nohouseadvantage.com, or just download the app right out of the App Store, and you get $25 deposit match. What have you been playing? Have you been playing the versus the house, or have you been playing the pick'em?
I play the versus the house primarily.
So you get the 5 different picks and just winning up your monies.
Yeah, because you can do less too. So you can do a minimum of 2. So I tend to do smaller ones. You can do 5 as the maximum actually, but if you want a better chance at winning, you can only do 2. So typically I do 10 at $5 a week. And if you do that, all you have to do is win 4 of them and you can be up a few bucks.
It's a nice little way to gamble if it's legal in your state. Definitely a nice way to go. And I use it for just like comparing different how their odds are to different sportsbook odds, and just that kind of helps me put parlays together on different books. But it kind of gives you an idea. Like if you got if they're thinking that James Robinson is going to rush for only 30 yards, and another book has James Robinson at 65 yards, it's all right. Well, somebody's somebody's overthinking it here.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely a fun app. It's been fun since we've gotten the sponsorship for it, and could definitely win some money that way, and doesn't cost a lot either. Let's get into the weekly twos here. If you're not familiar, this is where we go over each of us are going to give you 2 defensive linemen, 2 linebackers, and 2 defensive backs for a total of 18 players that we, for the most part, like specifically for week 8. Guys that might be floating around your waiver wire, or you might already have them stashed and you're kind of on the fence about playing this guy or this guy. And hopefully our knowledge about these different players puts you over the edge on which one you want to play. So I will start with my first defensive lineman. It's an edge rusher, Taquan Graham for the Falcons, going up against the Panthers. I'm not going to get too much into it because I am using the Falcons as my DST streamer. Spoiler alert. But Graham is seeing about 64% of snaps, and he's seeing a little bit on special teams. And now every time I bring up somebody from special teams, it's always like 5% here, 10% there. But he's seeing into the 20s. So he's definitely getting some special teams work. Now, him being a defensive lineman, edge rusher, his special teams points is pretty much only going to come from blocking a kick, which isn't very often, but it's possible. It's definitely something that can be done, and that can give you a couple extra points depending on how your league scores. But on the actual defensive side of things, I think the front 7, as much as they're not that scary, I think they can get to PJ Walker and get through the Panthers offensive line. And I want a little piece of this action because there's really not much for PJ Walker to go to. Yeah, they lost Christian McCaffrey. They lost Robbie Anderson, and just this week they lost Chuba Hubbard for the week. So they're going into this game with just DJ Moore and a bunch of Jerry's and Jordans. So I definitely want some action in this game. So I'm taking the edge rusher for the Falcons.
All right. My first defensive tackle is going to be Dorrance Armstrong of the Cowboys. The Bears have allowed the most sacks in the league. They've also allowed the most pressures, with 28 coming from the edges and 51 from the inside, for a total of 79. Justin Fields also some of the ball 11 times as well. And in just IDP only leagues, Armstrong's available in 97% of them. And he's recorded a sack in 5 out of 7 games. And Dan Quinn likes to move him around and play him as a stand-up linebacker and a run stuffer. And Chicago will run the ball a ton as well. So he definitely has the opportunity to get behind the line of scrimmage, sack Justin Fields, maybe a strip sack somewhere in there. And because of that, the Cowboys D-line being so good, a lot of those Cowboys defensive players will be used this week IDP-wise, but Armstrong, solely on availability and production, is the easiest way to go on this.
Yeah, and Dorrance Armstrong's been really effective this year, and I think Jerry and I have both used him, so Hasan can join the club and create be the last person to use him. So he's made his way around for all of us, but he's really replaced Randy Gregory pretty effectively on that defensive line. Also throw in there, they're probably going to start using Sam Williams a little more. He's a rookie for them. He played in his most snaps last week, which was only 14, which doesn't sound impressive, but in those 14 snaps, he had two sacks a tackle for loss, a forced fumble, and he also recovered that fumble. So that's quite a bit of action in only 14 snaps. And I know they were really excited about him coming out of Ole Miss. So I'd watch out for him over the next few weeks as well. And this could potentially be a spot against a weak offensive line where they use him. So that's my little bonus one there. Not my extra one because I usually throw in an extra one. But my first defensive lineman is Rasheem Green of the Texans. Going up against the Titans this week. The Titans give up the second most fantasy points this year to defensive linemen, so it has been a very favorable matchup for defensive linemen. And Rasheem Green has been really playing more and more since Jonathan Greenard went down. He's actually led all Texans defensive linemen in snaps since that injury. And then over the last 5 games during that span, he's had 3.5 sacks, 4 tackles for loss. So great matchup. Great opportunity. He's been playing a good amount, so he has a good opportunity to get himself a sack and maybe a tackle for loss this week. He is questionable. I'll throw that in there as well, so you have to watch out for that.
I've been looking for a piece of this game, and I was looking all up and down the lineup, and I ended up getting somebody, so it's going to be a little bit later. I'll talk about him, but I think that there's going to be a lot of defensive points in this game between the defensive linemen and the linebackers, and then mine's a defensive back. So I definitely like that pick there. I've already used a lot of, well, I've used a couple Texans before, so I'm going to the other side. My first one is, or my second one is going to be defensive tackle Sheldon Rankins for the New York Jets. The Jets, they've been surprisingly good on defense. They're winning games with their defense and running the ball. But Sheldon Rankins, he's going up against the Patriots have decided to go back to their first-round quarterback, Mac Jones, over the fan favorite of Bailey Zappi. But either way, whatever one they go with, Mac Jones really hasn't been all that great. A little bit of an injury issue there, but also just not – he doesn't have that rookie magic that he had last year. And then Bailey Zappi, he's a later-round pick. So even if he gets substituted in for Mac, kind of like they did last week, there's still – opportunity for error, getting to him behind the line of scrimmage, taking him down for a sack. The Patriots are also a run-first team, so Rankins run stuffing up that middle of the defensive line there, going up against Ramondre Stevenson and Damian Harris. I like the matchup there. He's started all 7 games. He's only seeing a little bit over half the snaps, 56% of the snaps, but even in those 56%, I think that he could get to Mac Jones or Bailey Zappi, maybe get a couple tackle for losses on those running backs that I mentioned. And I think it's going to be it's a divisional game, so I think it's going to be low scoring, which really doesn't matter in general. But I think that there's just going to be a lot of clock killing, running the ball. Rankins just clogging up that defensive line. And so if you have to start a defensive tackle, that's really kind of where I would go with this, because in most leagues where you're starting defensive linemen, you could just go with an edge rusher or even a hybrid linebacker defensive lineman and throw them in there for the extra points. But if you got to start a defensive tackle, I like Rankins in that spot.
Definitely. My second defensive tackle is going to be Al Woods of the Seattle Seahawks, and these two statistics from the last couple of weeks are very insane. So last week, he just played 23% of snaps, and then 2 weeks ago, 26% of snaps, and still was able to record a sack in both games, had 10 to 17 points against the Chargers and the Saints, respectively. It's also followed up by the fact that when he plays run-heavy offenses, Pete Carroll is playing him over 50% of the time, and then he's averaging 6 solo tackles per game in those run-heavy games as well. So in a very small amount of snaps versus pass-heavy teams, he's putting up points, and then he's putting up points against run-heavy teams as well. He missed week 6, so in 4 of 6 games, he scored 10 to 17 points in all of those games, double digits, and he's not even seen 47% of snaps on the season in total 39%, and he's still scoring double digits. He's definitely going to be available to pick up everywhere, with this guy not being known basically by anybody. And the Giants, along with their 34 rush attempts per game, it's going to give him the volume that he needs to be on the field to get those tackles as well and points.
All right. My second defensive lineman, when I was looking to choose, I wanted to pick the most generic name I could possibly find. So
You made up?
this one is not made up. It's James Smith-Williams, which maybe that is made up, but you can't get much more generic than that. So he is a defensive lineman for the Washington Commanders, up against the Colts this week. The Colts have been a very favorable matchup. That offensive line is terrible this year. So I like the matchup quite a bit. And then he's actually been playing a good amount. And I mentioned this earlier in the season with George Karlaftis, who was getting a lot of playing time, but it didn't necessarily lead to production. Been the same thing for James Smith-Williams over the last few weeks. He's played in 75% of the snaps over the last 2 weeks, which is a very high percentage for a defensive lineman. So he's been on the field, and I think this is his opportunity in a nice matchup to finally have that time on the field lead to production.
All right, can't wait to see. I looked ahead and I saw your next one. I'm looking forward to that one. My first linebacker is Matt Milano. A little bit of a homer pick there. Bills going up against the Packers Sunday night. For being honest, the Packers, they're going to need to run or throw the ball if they want to keep up in this game. The problem for the Packers is that their biggest pass catching threats are Aaron Jones out of the backfield and Robert Tonyan, the tight end. So they're going to be without Alan Lazard for the most part. Romeo Doubs, he's coming off a 0 last week, so we know what his floor is. And the defensive backs for Buffalo have kind of been shutting people down. Both of those players, Aaron Jones and Robert Tonyan, they're most likely going to see a lot of Matt Milano in coverage. The other linebacker for the Bills, Tremaine Edmonds, he's a freakish beast, but Milano is more of the athletic one. He's the one that gets a lot of the tight end play. Just a couple weeks ago versus Baltimore, he racked up 13 tackles. And that was on just about half of Lamar's targets went to the running backs and the tight end, Mark Andrews. It was one of his low games. But between the running backs and Mark Andrews getting 14 of those 29 targets, Milano was all over the field for him. He's seen about 90% of the snaps. And just, again, the Packers, if we're being honest, they got to throw the ball. So I think Matt Milano is going to be heavily involved in this game. He's not really one that really rushes the quarterback. So, if he ends up getting in on Aaron Rodgers, that's another couple points in the sack department. But he's more so going to get you the points in the tackle department, trying to get to your Robert Tonyans and your Aaron Joneses. And even A.J. Dillon coming up the middle on a goal line, he could stuff him there for a tackle.
Definitely. All right, so my first linebacker is going to be Divine Diablo of the Raiders. He is questionable. Just wanted to put that out there. In the beginning of the season, he was just there to replace Perriman, who was injured and underperforming, and they were thinking Perriman was going to go back to Denzel Perriman, that is, would go back to what he was. But he's not been doing that, and Diablo's been getting 100% of snaps while being rostered in 25% less leagues than Denzel Perriman, IDP league-wise. And he's registered 11 to 22 points in every single game, and he's got 4 out of 7 games with 15-plus points. So he's been all over the place. And that's exactly what you want out of a linebacker 2 or a linebacker 3. 11 out of 15 points and 100% of snaps. He's always going to be on the field. So he's definitely always going to be able to do something.
Yeah, definitely. I like that one quite a bit. So my first linebacker, which is also a real name, Demetrius Flanagan Fowles of the San Francisco 49ers. So Jerry mentioned in his injury report that Dre Greenlaw is out. That 49ers defense is slowly starting to get healthy, but just seems like when one guy comes back, somebody else goes out. So Flanagan Fowles is going to be starting at linebacker for him against the Rams. The Rams' offensive line has been weak, and to say the least. And then when you couple that with the fact that most of their passing game has kind of been short throws to Cooper Kupp and Tyler Higbee, that does offer a lot of opportunities for linebackers to get tackles. If you look kind of deeper into Flanagan Fowles' skills, he's known as more of a coverage linebacker. So I expect him to probably play against Higbee and Cooper Kupp a little bit, which means he is going to have quite the opportunity to get some tackles this week.
Can't wait to see who your next made-up name is.
I got a few more, don't you worry.
My second linebacker, a little bit more of a household name, Jerome Baker, Dolphins going up against the Lions. You got DeAndre Swift is in line to be back. TJ Hawkinson is healthy at this point of the year. Jamal Williams is still the goal line back there. So there's plenty of short yardage, mid yardage talent to go around for Baker to pick up some fantasy points. Kind of the same story as Matt Milano, where I think the Lions are going to have to be passing a little bit more. Jerome Baker kind of just being all over the field and trying to tackle those very talented names that I just mentioned. He's seeing just a measly 96% of the snaps for the Dolphins D, so could be better. Jared Goff, he's not exactly a mobile quarterback. He's been prone to picks and sacks recently. He's coming off a 5-sack game against Dallas last week, which, I mean, Dallas is sacking everybody, so maybe Miami gets to him 3 to 4 times. But I think Jerome Baker could find himself on the stat sheet for a couple of those categories, handful of tackles, maybe getting to Goff, maybe even an interception on him over the middle, trying to go to Hawkinson. But I definitely like Baker this week for Miami.
Right.
Hasan, who you got for your next linebacker?
Yeah, my linebacker too is also going to be a household name. It's going to be Leighton Vander Esch of the Cowboys that Jordan had mentioned a little bit earlier. He had a great rookie season, got hurt for a while after that. He's quietly, because all the other big names on the Cowboys D-line, he's quietly having a great season where he scored 12 to 17 points in 5 out of 7 games, and he's just coming off a 17-point game. And he's also available, again, because of the injury history in all IDP leagues. 95% of leagues he's available. So, I mean, if you can get that off, probably you'd play him at a linebacker 3 and expect about 12 points at least, probably all the way up to 15, maybe even 20 if he can get a sack or so in there. It's definitely worth it.
Yeah, he's seen. I mean, we've seen him in his early years, the talent that he has. So definitely, I mean, Micah Parsons has kind of taken over the linebacking role for Dallas. He's the household name for the most part there now, but we've seen it in Leighton Vander Esch that he's got LB1 potential. So I definitely like that one.
Yeah, and it's funny, I think Hasan's going to be bringing up another guy that I mentioned too. It's funny when I put together the waiver wire segment and then, because I don't scroll down and look at the rest of the notes, I'm like, okay, they're going to come up again. So my second linebacker is Deion Jones, who is definitely a real player, going up against the Bengals this week. So the Bengals, fun fact, actually give up the most points to linebackers. I do think Deion Jones got the chance to play in his first game last week with the Browns, had 5 tackles for him. Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, which I think I nailed, is a little banged up as well. No, that's a real player, and I nailed that name. I've been practicing that all day, Jerry. But he's a little banged up as well, so they're not sure if he's going to be at full strength, and if he does, it's kind of questionable how much he's going to play or how effective he's going to be. So I think that offers Deion Jones quite a bit of opportunity to potentially break out in a second game here with the Browns.
All right. My first defensive back he was mentioned on the injury report, but he's got the illness, Jonathan Abram of the Raiders. I guess I'm really buying into this Raiders defensive special teams because last week the Raiders DST was my streamer. This week I'm picking players from them. But the fact is Andy Dalton threw 3 first-half interceptions last week versus the Cardinals on Thursday Night Football. 2 of those were pick sixes. And I think the Cardinals defense is inferior to the Raiders. I think the Raiders have a better defense as far as, I mean, at least on paper they do. They got a lot better players. I mean, but Andy Dalton, he's back in there again. He came out for the second half of that game too. I really thought it was going to be Jameis Winston, but it wasn't. And now Andy Dalton is starting again. But if he happens to get pulled for a performance for whatever reason, Jameis Winston gets to go in there and he could just do what Andy Dalton does and throw interceptions as well. The Saints are going to be without Michael Thomas. They're going to be without Jarvis Landry. There's rumors of Alvin Kamara being moved. So if those rumors are true, I could see Kamara possibly getting a lighter workload to make sure he doesn't get hurt before they try to move him. If not, then I think he's going to have a full load. But shading coverage over to Chris Olave could open up some fantasy points for Abram. He's had at least 5 tackles in every game except for 1. He's played 92% of snaps. But like I said, just keep an eye on that report. It is, I believe, I could double check it, but I believe it's later in the day game. I think it's a 4:00 game. So the reports for that game will be out after the early slate, the 1:00 game. We're on the East Coast, so the 1:00 games have already started and they're into the third quarter. So you're going to want to keep an eye on that. Have a pivot play. But if Abram's out there, he's one of those every week starts, I believe, anyways. So just keep an eye on his injury. Well, not injury, it's an illness. Keep an eye, make sure he's playing.
All right. My first defensive back is going to be James Bradbury, of cornerback for the Eagles. In the 2 games that Kenny Pickett has played from behind, he has thrown an average of 48 pass attempts per game, which no team has thrown more than that in general. And I'm assuming that the Steelers will be playing from behind as well in this game, so Pickett will have to toss it a lot. And his first 4 NFL games, starts or not, he's thrown 7 interceptions, only completed 57% of his passes. And he throws a lot of them towards the boundaries. So both of those are positives for Bradbury. Pickett forces throws, tries to make things happen when the Steelers are down. And obviously that's, rookie mistakes, but Bradbury, being the vet, should be able to take advantage of that. And Bradbury, he's at 10 plus points in 4 to 6 games in general. And again, against a rookie quarterback who's just going to be behind, trying to force things, probably going to be throwing at least 45 passes, at the minimum 40. It's a great plus matchup for him this week.
Before you go, Jordan, I just want to correct. It's a 1:00 game for the Saints and Raiders, so you will have some time to find a pivot. There is a London game this week, Denver and Jacksonville. So outside of Denver and Jacksonville, and obviously Baltimore and the Tampa Bay, we should know if Jonathan Abram is playing before all the games start.
Thank you so much, Jerry. My first defensive back is Kirby Joseph, and I picked him for 2 reasons. One, he reminds me of playing Nintendo 64, and second, fun fact, he is the only Kirby to spell his name with a K-E, so I think that's pretty cool. But he's going to be starting at defensive back for the Lions this week. He actually looked really good last week. He had 5 tackles and a forced fumble. Deshaun Elliott, who Jerry, you'll notice a trend where I notice or where I point out guys that are injured because that offers a lot of opportunity for him. So he's a young guy, looked really good in his time coming in the second half last week. Deshaun Elliott has been a top 10 defensive back this year, so he's got big shoes to fill, but I think he's known more for his run stuffing ability, so they're going to play him in the box a little bit. If he does stay back, there's some opportunity against the Dolphins, passing it down the field, and Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle getting to the second level. So I think he's got a good potential to potentially put up double-digit tackles this week.
Good potential to potentially. I like it.
Yep.
My final defensive back is going to be another safety. I'm going with Amani Hooker. This is where I found my Titans-Texans matchup. He's for the Titans. I wanted to go with Owens or Petrie on the other side of this matchup, but Hasan had them both in his top 25, and for good reason. I also, not that I was looking at Kevin Byard because he's always in the top 25, so I went with the other safety. I went with Amani Hooker. Again, kind of like the Alvin Kamara trade rumors. This one hurts a little bit more if you're a Houston fan, but there's trade rumors of Brandon Cooks ahead of Tuesday's deadline. So again, if those rumors are true, and this is for like any of those, if you got any of these players on your fantasy teams, you got to be wary of your Chase Claypools, your Brandon Cooks, your Alvin Kamaras. I mean, I wouldn't sit them, but if teams are really looking to play these guys, you got to go in with a mindset that they might not give you maximum performance because teams are going to try not to let them get hurt before they get moved. So Brandon Cooks, if he's one of those guys that are moved to a wide receiver needy team, he's been bounced around the league since he came into the league, and which is weird because he's like one of the most consistent receivers in the league. Just goes anywhere and plays really well. That's going to leave the Texans with 0 pass catchers. I mean, they're going to have nobody. Nico Collins was hurt last week. They're going to be down to like Philip Dorsett and then Hasan on the other side. He's Amani Hooker. He's missed a couple weeks, but he's been playing at 94% snap share when he is active. He's coming off a 10 tackle game against Indy. So whether Cooks plays or not, Hooker should find himself helping out with Cook's coverage or looking down Brevin Jordan and OJ Howard. And I believe another double-digit tackle performance is very doable in this game.
All right, my final defensive back is going to be Ryan Neal of the Seahawks, who Jordan had mentioned a little bit earlier. He's been great after being started as a starter over Josh Jones. And, he kept it rock and roll in week 7, 6 solo tackles, 1 assisted, 1 tackle for loss, 1 interception, 4 passes defended. That's 24 points right there. He's going to be playing every snap. He's been doing that for 3 weeks in a row now, and it looks like he's going to continue that for the rest of the season. And Jordan mentioned this as well earlier. This guy's probably trending towards being a DB1 by the end of the year. Neal was hurt for 2 games, and he played under 50% of snaps in his first game back, which wasn't great. But then the next 3 games after that is just taken off with all these DB1 numbers, and he's shown no signs of slowing down whatsoever. Appears to be growing more and more comfortable in his role as it goes. And they're playing a New York Giants team that gives up the 11th most fantasy points to the safety position. And then he's sitting on waivers in a lot of places right now. And if you can get a potential DB1 off for the rest of the season off waivers, that's something you grab right away. And again, he's going to be 100% a DB1 at the end of this year.
Yep, I think he's going to continue to be on a roll. My last DB is Miles Hartsfield of the Panthers. going up against the Falcons. Depending on your scoring, he's actually had 20 points in 3 of the last 4 games, which I think at some point Jerry and I should go over the point system that we use in our one IDP Dynasty League, because I like that scoring quite a bit. But he's been very effective, 25 tackles over the last 4 games. I've been streaming guys quite often against the Falcons just because they're one of the top teams in terms of rush attempts, so that typically offers a lot of tackle potential for DBs and linebackers. So he's been a guy that's been heavily involved in the run stopping game for the Panthers front, which has actually been much more effective lately. So I like the matchup. He's been playing pretty well, and I think he's a great guy to fill in this week.
All right, let's move on to our defensive special team streamers. Again, as I alluded to it earlier, I'm going with the Atlanta Falcons over Carolina. This week, there's actually quite a bit of good streamers out there. Only 2 teams on bye, like we mentioned. So for the most part, you definitely got some options. So I guess I probably could have gone better than Atlanta, but I'm going to go with Atlanta. They're going to be without AJ Terrell, as I mentioned earlier, but the Panthers are going to be without an offense. They don't have CMC anymore. They don't have Robbie Anderson anymore, and Chuba Hubbard has already been ruled out for this weekend. The only guy left is DJ Moore, the lone man walking. PJ Walker, somehow between his XFL and NFL career as a starter, he's 8-1. I don't know how that happened, but that's I mean, he could win, I guess, technically, and still have a good performance for the Falcons defense, but I think that's going to come to an end. The Falcons are 4-point favorites. It's a low over-under. It's not the lowest of the week, surprisingly, but it is a low one at 41 points. This game, they're playing for first place in the NFC South, believe it or not. If the Panthers win, they're 4-4, I believe, or they're 3-5, but they have the tiebreaker, and if Atlanta wins, they're 4-4. It's crazy. I think Atlanta's front 7 could get to PJ Walker a couple times, force a turnover or 2. And Avery Williams, he's a running back, but for the most part, defensive special teams is special teams. So if you get a kick return, punt return, he's the punt returner too. So if he takes one to the house, that's another 6 points for you for the defense.
Definitely. All right, so my DST stream of the week is going to be a homer pick. It's going to be the Tennessee Titans versus the Houston Texans. The Titans are just coming off a 19-point performance where they forced 3 turnovers, had 1 touchdown, and that was against the second best team in their division. Now they're playing the worst team in their division. And they're rostered in 41% of leagues, so they still are available in the majority of leagues out there as well. And then Davis Mills, last 5 games, it's just been 4 touchdowns, 4 turnovers, 10 sacks, 3 fumbles forced on him. And that's 100% there for a Titans team to take, who during their 4-game win streak has held QBs to 7 TDs and 6 total turnovers, forced 5 fumbles, had 10 sacks, and then they're also tied for 5th in turnover differential and tied for 6th in most turnovers forced. So, again, at the end of the day, playing a team like Houston, coming off a game like that against the Colts, been playing very well for the last 4 weeks in general, consistently on defense. I feel like they're just going to keep the ball rolling.
Yeah, and I think that was a good excuse to talk about their 4-game win streak, so I see you there. My last one or my streamer is Seattle this week, and Seattle's defense has actually played really well this year, which is still one of the biggest surprises to me. Right now, they're 10% owned in Yahoo leagues, 4% owned in sleeper leagues. In Yahoo standard leagues, they are the 10th best scoring defensive special teams unit this year. And in sleeper standard leagues, they're actually the 4th highest scoring. So they've been really effective. So it's shocking to see their ownership percentage be so low this year. And that young defensive line has been getting to the quarterback. They've been forcing turnovers with some of those young DBs. The Giants' offense this year has been kind of a neutral matchup for defenses, but I think this is an opportunity where we potentially see the Daniel Jones who forces a few turnovers with that young Seattle front. So I like the matchup for them. The Giants' offensive line is a little banged up as well right now, so I think the Seahawks might be able to take advantage. And even if not so, the Seattle's defense is worth taking a shot on if you're in a super deep league because they've been really effective so far this year.
All right, so there we got our twos, we got our defensive special team streamers. We went through 21 different picks and players, or 21 different between 3 teams and 18 players. And we didn't mention one Jacksonville Jaguar going up against Russ Wilson. What is going on there?
We suck. That's it.
You think Russ has a breakout game for the year, or we just
Hey, I got 2 of them in my top 25.
All right, yeah, I guess that makes sense. I was looking at that game too, and I was like, I got to get to Russ somehow, but I couldn't find anybody that I wanted. But you do got Josh Allen in there, and who's the other one that you got in your top 25?
Rashawn Jenkins.
Yeah, oh yeah, yep. So it's that's the Sunday morning London game, so that's gonna be at least we open up at least on the East Coast. We open up our day at 9:30 and get to watch football all day, and then I come home from work and I get to watch the Bills smash the Packers. So that's how my Sunday is going to be. We got about half the fantasy season left, guys.
Mm-hmm.
We're halfway there. We're in week 8 right now. Well, actually, we're less than halfway there or more than halfway there because fantasy playoffs start. Ideally, they start in about week 15. You guys, gearing up for the second half of the season?
Yeah, we talked about it a little bit last week, but this is the time of year where I start looking at potential fantasy playoff matchups if you're looking to trade for guys for the rest of the season. So, over the next 2 to 3 weeks, I think that's something to keep an eye out on.
Yeah, and this is the time of year where you have a lot of 3 and 4 teams or 4 and 3 teams. Either they make a push or they just completely fall off. So it's just there's no real middle. And if you're 7 and 7, you're most likely missing or just the 6th seed getting knocked out right away. So
just don't. I mean, the only thing that we can say is just don't give up. I mean, just if whether you're 3 and 4, 4 and 3, 2 and 5, 0 and 7. I mean, 0 and 7 is tough, but you could still make it because if you got another 0 and 7, 1 and 6 team, maybe they give up, and that gives you an opportunity to jump them, and then all of a sudden you just get like next week. We already mentioned next week is a 6-team bye week, so
yeah.
I mean, you got CeeDee Lamb, Dak Prescott, you got Nick Chubb on bye next week, you got Cortland Sutton, and if Russ is one of your quarterbacks, he's on bye next week. So there's 6 teams on bye next week. So that could be a week that you turn around just by playing the right matchups and getting to guys that are actually going to be playing next week. There's only going to be 26 teams that are on the field next week. So definitely take a look at how you can turn your team around if you're at that end. Make some trades. You got your trade deadline is probably coming up in a couple weeks in your fantasy playoffs. So definitely take a look into all that. But with that being said, let's enjoy some London football. Let's enjoy a nice slate of games, and then a nice Sunday night game, and even Monday night. Even though Jamar Chase is going to be out for a few weeks, we got a nice Monday night matchup between the Bengals and the Browns. So let's enjoy Week 8 football, and we'll see you guys next week for Week 9.